let's see. Hey, just how it used to be. Hey, come along with me. Let your spirit run free along the old Black Nile. Good afternoon, good afternoon. Greetings and welcome to the 11th episode of the Browder File show. I'm your host, Tony Browder, coming to you live via WPFW, your station for jazz and justice, information, and news you can use. Today's show is dedicated to Mr. Neely Fuller, a giant in our community who passed away this past Saturday, February the 1st, at the age of 95. And this brother was true to the very end, delivering his message and doing his best to awaken everybody in the sound of his voice who was willing to listen to his message and change their behavior. Mr. Fuller, as you all should know, was the jegna to the late Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, ancestor Francis Cress Welsing, who left us on January the 2nd in 2016. Mr. Fuller was instrumental in helping Dr. Welsing refine the scope of this maniacal mental illness known as white supremacy. And for those of you all who love Dr. Welsing, and were familiar with her writings, her teachings, and her presentations, you all should have noticed, as did I, that less than 30 days after Dr. Welsing left this earth, every single reporter on practically every news station in America began using the phrase racism and white supremacy. They never said it. They never used that term while she was alive, but as soon as she was gone, everybody starts talking about racism and white supremacy. And I can't help but feel that that was Dr. Welsing's spirit working in the ancestral realm to make sure that her message was delivered harder and stronger than it ever had been delivered before. So now, with Mr. Fuller joining Dr. Welsing in the ancestral realm, and he will become an ancestor on March the 13th after this 40-day transition period, I can just imagine the two of them working side by side to defeat this beast that they identified as racism and white supremacy. We're about to see things step into a higher gear. So I spoke with Mr. Fuller's son, Mark, yesterday, and he said, true to his father's desires, there will be no funeral or memorial service for Mr. Fuller because that was not his wish. Instead, his dad urged us to do something constructive with our time. The time for celebration, the time for partying is over. And if you all didn't know that before January the 20th, you should know it now. It's time for all hands on deck. It's time for us to be serious. So rest assured that we will commemorate the life and the legacy of this great soul, Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., in the very near future. And we ask you to do as Brother Listervelt Middleton encouraged us to do, to sharpen your eye and tune your ear so that you will hear and know when a special commemoration or two will be done to honor this great man. So please, please stay tuned. I also want to acknowledge my brother in the struggle, my brother in the fight for African liberation, beginning with our minds by focusing on African deep thought. I want to thank Brother Kaba for an outstanding show that he did this past Monday. Everything happens for a reason. Those of you all who know me know that I don't believe in coincidences, and everything happens for a reason. Kaba's guest, I don't know who it was, but his guest did not show up for his show. And that gave Kaba the opportunity to pivot and to share with his audience the forward and the preface to one of my favorite books. And that book is none other than Saber, The Reawakening of the African Mind by my dear friend, my brother, Asa G. Hilliard III. He shared some mind-freeing information and started something that some of us here at WPFW will keep going. So again, stay tuned and please follow our lead. I also want to thank Brother Ambrose Lane Jr. for having me on this show this past Monday, where we concluded our discussion on
My third book, Survival Strategies for Africans in America, 13 Steps to Freedom. We discussed steps 7 through 13. And so thank you, Brother Ambrose, for allowing me to discuss a book which I wrote 29 years ago, a book which in rereading is essentially a playbook for 2025 and beyond. We lay out specific details, specific things that we as Africans living in America, Africans living in the diaspora, could be doing and should be doing in order to gain freedom. And I want to thank in advance. I want to be previous, borrowing a term from some of my Jamaican loved ones. I want to borrow a phrase and be previous and thank Brother Bobby Rocks in advance for the outstanding show that I know he's going to do this Friday afternoon. So please, please, please stay tuned to WPFW, your station for news and information, because we are going to be freeing some minds this February. So before I bring on my guests, speaking of freedom, I want to read a poem from Asa's book, Saber, The Reawakening of the African Mind. And that poem is called Freedom, Freedom with a question mark. Asa says, our first mistake was that we thought of freedom as a place rather than as a continuation of a struggle. Tyranny never sleeps. Our second mistake was that we thought of freedom as a goal rather than as a launching pad from which to reach our goal. Without purposes, freedom hardly matters. Our third mistake was that we thought that freedom made us free. That, however, is license, not freedom at all. Freedom, said Asa Hilliard, is being shackled to identity. Freedom is being shackled to purpose and direction and being in consistent pursuit of this elusive thing called freedom. So, sisters and brothers, I have a very special treat for you today. My first Black History Month program here on WPFW. And it is my honor, it is my pleasure to present to you a brother who's only visited the U.S. once, I believe, and that was 2012, 2013. And that is Robin Walker, the author of an incredible publication titled When We Ruled. Robin comes to us from the UK, from London, I believe. And at this time, Robin, I want to invite you to unmute yourself. And I send you greetings from everybody here in the district specifically who have read your book and have fallen in love with your mind, with your brilliance. Welcome to the Browder File, Robin. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well, sir. Thank you for inviting me to come onto your show. I'm very, very honored.
Look, man, I want to say that I've got a good friend of mine, and I don't mind shouting him out, Clyde Swan. He taught history at in high school level, and he was the first person to turn me on to your book. This brother went crazy reading your book and was able to do lessons for a couple of years just based on the information that you exposed him to. It's a phenomenal read. And I want to acknowledge my brother Paul Coates of Black Classic Press for reprinting and publishing your book here in the United States, in Baltimore. And I want to thank you for correcting a misperception that I had. I thought it was Paul who brought you here to talk about your book, and we hosted that gathering at the IKG Center in Washington, D.C., but it was actually you and Sister Makeda who gangstered your way into D.C. and twisted Paul's arm and presented yourself to the D.C. community. So thank you for that, my brother. I appreciate you. And that was a bold move because Paul is no chump. Now you all had to do some serious arm twisting.
Makeda, being African American, she was a very good go-between, a very good negotiator. And so, yeah, we negotiated staying at Paul Coates's house. And we were very well looked after. And I think on the very first day we landed, you turned up. So that was a surprise.
Okay. And I met Makeda through another landmark here in DC, Sister Janua, Janua Moja. I
That's right.
remember, I remember going over
They're
Janua.
friends, and they go back in the day.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And so Janua is another dear soul who is beloved in DC, as well as her husband Yuki, who does these incredible sculptures of African liberators, African freedom fighters, and they can be found in locations throughout DC. Well, look, brother Robin, I've been so looking forward to interviewing you, and this is really not going to be an interview. I want it to be a conversation between two brothers who love history, who love African people, and I want to do something a little different. I'd like to spend a little time talking to you about you. What put you on this path to make you the brilliant scholar that you are? And you strike me as a very modest, very, very calm, cool, and collected guy. But I do want to acknowledge you as a brilliant mind who's done incredible work. So what started you on this path, brother?
You'll be surprised to know that I have no background in history whatsoever. Not even a high school qualification in history. Originally, my interest was music. I have a background in classical music.
Mm.
And
Classical music. So hold on a second. I'm gonna stop you because you said two things that just made me want to chime in. I don't have a background in history. I didn't learn about African history until after college. And when I did come to college, I was going to major in music. So yeah, we have that in common. Your interest was in classical music, so writing, singing, performing. What aspect of music?
I was a trombonist.
Ah, a
So,
trombone.
so
Okay.
what happened was I was going to or from university, can't remember. Somebody spotted me and said, "Is that a trombone?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I take your phone number?" And he took my phone number. And a month later, he invited me to a rehearsal. And that was to join, I didn't know at the time, Courtney Pine and the Jazz Warriors. And
Hmm.
that was at the time Black Britain's only all black jazz orchestra. And it was the people in the Jazz Warriors that began to culturally educate me.
Mm.
Before that, I was on the same coconut stuff that everybody else was on.
Same coconut stuff. Now, I've never heard that phrase before, and I assume it's unique to Black Britain. The coconut is black on the outside, white on the inside. Is that the reference?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
got it.
Absolutely. I think the American one is Oreo, is that right?
Oreo, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was on the same rubbish as everybody else. But the Jazz Warriors people were the first to acculturate me. And they told me the importance of reading. And initially they got me reading jazzmen's autobiographies. So I read Dizzy Gillespie's To Be or Not to Bop. I read the Coltrane one, I think it was called Chasing the Train. I read Miles Davis's autobiography, and a world of knowledge started to open up to me as I learned more and more about jazz and jazzmen and the importance of being serious about culture. And another thing that happened is during my university days, I moved into a household where somebody had Chancellor Williams's book, The
Ah.
Destruction of Black Civilization. And I promised myself that when I graduate, I will read this book. And I ended up reading it 5 times.
Chancellor Williams has that effect on minds that are ready to receive that knowledge, brother. You obviously were ready.
Yeah, and it changed my life. That was the beginning of the life changing. Then in the Jazz Warriors, Courtney Pine was very, very much into somebody called Yusef Ben Yochanan, whoever this Yusef Ben Yochanan person is. And so eventually I read some of his work, and that was again a revolution. And then gradually, a girlfriend told me that there was somebody called Femi Biko who teaches Black Studies and runs courses, and perhaps we could attend. So that was the beginnings of my acculturation into Black history.
Well, you know, your acculturation mirrors mine 100%. And I think that some of the best historians were not college trained. They were autodidacts, like Dr. Ben, like John Jackson, like John Henry Clark. There were people who had other interests in life, but the ancestors tapped them on his shoulder and said, son, you're moving in this direction. You know, we're going to use you as an instrument to liberate African minds. So, brother, I'm glad you were open. I'm glad you were receptive. I'm grateful that you gave your telephone number to a complete stranger. And that stranger was someone who you were destined to meet because he was there to change your life. And you know, the more that I study, you know, African history, the more I begin to appreciate African spirituality, or what Asa referred to as African sacred science. That ancestors are real, and they use the living as vessels through which they can continue their work. And those who do phenomenal work, such as yourself, are open to receiving these messages from these ancestors, man. So this is so beautiful. Look, I want to drill down a little bit more, because in the acknowledgments of your book, you acknowledge several people who also furthered your progress along this path of self-identity. You presented someone, Mr. Benatari, who you said was your biggest influence. Tell me a little bit about this brother, and how did he influence your life?
We were all students of Dr. Femi Biko, and Dr. Biko created a little organization called Association of Pan-African Studies. And Benabi was a part of that group. And what he had done was his own research into ancient African science and technology. And he had advanced the game much further than Professor Van Sertima's Blacks in Science. He'd gone further. And what he showed was that we could reconstruct African history using its sciences and technologies and tell the stories of the great civilizations. So not just Tarseti and Kemet, but we could also do the same thing with ancient Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. We could do the same thing with Nok, Igbo, Yoruba, Benin, Nupe. And we could reconstruct it through its sciences and technology. So we could look at the architecture, we could look at the fine arts, we could look at the metallurgy. And I'd never seen anybody attempt to even do this before. And that changes the perspective. You see, as much as I love Professor Chancellor Williams, he gives the impression that African heritage has all been destroyed.
The destruction of Black civilization, yes.
Right, and then you find out it hasn't all been destroyed. Monuments are still standing that no one's talking about. Manuscripts still exist that no one's talking about. Fine art still exists that no one's talking about. And consequently, I realized that there's a major story here. So what Benabi Benatari did was show me how you can use this type of evidence to reconstruct African history. And he's the first person I've ever seen do that. That was his influence.
Does he have any publications that you would like to make us aware of?
He runs websites on, he's from Nigeria, so he does websites on his own ethnicity, or an ethnicity known as the Ijos, IJAW. He runs websites on them, but don't get it twisted. He's very Pan-African in his writing. Now, the main thing is that his main paper, we called it the Document of African Civilization, never got published. But we all read it in the Association of Pan-African Studies. It should have been published. But the main thing now is, since Dr. Finch wrote his book, The Star of Deep Beginnings, The
Yes.
Genesis of African Science and Technology. Some of what Ben Aby has is now out of date compared to that. But when that book came, when his paper came out in 93, revolutionary.
Phenomenal. You also spoke of Alan Mitchell, who you said encouraged you to bring more color in your writing. What was that tip all about?
Yeah, Alan Mitchell, my late friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, he was actually my best friend. He died a few years ago.
Okay, my condolences.
But he was a comic book writer.
Ah.
And because he's a comic book writer, his whole skill set was not to make history a lineage recounting of fact after fact after fact, but you have to paint pictures. So the kind of pictures he wanted me to paint is if we're walking through an ancient African city, the city of Timbuktu, the city of Djenné, the city of Kano, what was there? What would you see? What would you smell? What would you hear? What experiences would you have walking through that city? And that idea of bringing ancient and medieval African history alive with a kind of poetic flair. I'm not pretending that my writing is in any way poetic, but it's definitely evocative. So you really will get a sense of walking through Timbuktu in the 16th century, walking through Djenné in the 11th century. You really will get a sense of that because I'm going to tell you what's there. I'm going to tell you what's there to see. So you don't just get a chronological retelling of facts.
You know, that's the sign of a good writer, using words to create images in the mind of the reader such that they are there and they see exactly what you're describing. So that's an art. That's a skill that very few people possess. And you've mastered that skill, man. You know, you mentioned Femi Biko. I had him on my list. You mentioned Kamani Nahusi, brother from Guyana, who is in the same path, walks in the same path as another Guyanese brother, Ivan Van Sertima, another Guyanese brother, George G.M. James. You mentioned Stephen Howe. And you also reference a man who told you you must do the reading, Ray Bowen. What was Ray's influence on you?
Ray Bowen, very great gentleman. I'm still in touch with Ray right now. Old man, but still doing the thing. Ray Bowen, he's actually a friend of Charles Finch, very close friend of Charles Finch.
Okay.
Ray Bowen, when I first submitted my writing to Ray Bowen, he trashed it, he trashed it, he trashed it, he trashed it. And I was vexed. I was vexed. And then he called Alan Mitchell, the same Alan Mitchell that we've just been talking about. And he said to Alan, if that Robin Walker geezer listens to me, he's going to be something. And that was the best tutoring I've ever had. And I did listen to him. And he was the one that he had this phrase, you've got to do the reading, you've got to do the reading. He was the person that said, if you're reading somebody's book, look in the bibliography and look at the books that's in the bibliography and try to read those books so that you know where every piece of information is coming from. He was also the person that told me, update. Don't just repeat what's there, update it, develop it. It doesn't matter if I'm the only person in the world saying something. If it's been updated, update. Don't repeat what's already been said. And without Ray Bowen, I would never have become the Black History Man.
Well, I'm grateful that you followed his advice and that you allow him to shape your mind, because you do something with your work, Robin, that a lot of young people who consider themselves historians and scholars and researchers don't do. One, they don't do the reading, or they don't do a deep dive in the reading, and they never reference their sources. I mean, I've heard people go on and on and on and talk about history and culture and concepts, and I know exactly where they got those concepts, those histories, but they never credit their sources. So my hat's off to you, brother, for acknowledging the people that shaped your mind and helped make you the person that you are. And that's a sign of your humility. It's a sign of your reverence for those souls that open doors that you have walked through. And I'm sure that you're now paying it forward and opening the door for all of those young sisters and brothers behind you who will follow in your footsteps. So let's move on, because I want to drill down and talk about you. You know, oftentimes when great writers come on and discuss their writing, not a lot of time is spent discussing them. I'm always interested in the circumstances that shape the person that did these incredible things. That's why I so appreciate the documentary on John Henry Clark that Wesley Snipes produced, that explores Dr. Clark's early life. And in the book, he talks about having read an article by Arthur Schomburg, an article that was written in 1925 titled "The Negro Digs Up His Past." And reading that article lit a spark inside of a young 18-year-old John Henry Clark's mind. And he wound up taking a train, a freight train, to New York City. He went to the 135th Street Library, went to the third floor, encountered Mr. Schomburg and asked him to teach him everything he knew right now, here on the spot. And Mr. Schomburg, to his credit, said, "Young man, you must first read the works of the people who enslaved you. Read the works of people who turned your life upside down." So he was given the same advice that Mitchell had given you. And that's what it takes. Know your enemy, right? Know the subject matter. Then you can articulate intelligently what the issues are and expand on them. And that's the sign of a good learner, a good listener, and a good doer. So I want to reference a couple of more people before we go to the bottom of the hour, take a station break, and then come back and then have you talk about the book and lay out some of the highlights of When We Ruled. You mentioned some of my favorite scholars. You referenced Ivan Van Sertima. You referenced William Leo Hansberry. You referenced Sheikh Anta Diop, and of course, Dr. Yosef Ben Yuckanan. But you gave, I think, one of the greatest compliments to my favorite scholar of all times, and that's John G. Jackson. You said that John G. Jackson wrote the best work on Black history there ever has been. And brother, I got to tell you, his book, Introduction to African Civilization, is by far in the top 3 books in my library. So what drew you to Jackson, and what made him a great lover of history to you?
Initially, I wasn't into Jackson. I was into Chancellor Williams.
Sure.
But Femi Biko said, no, Jackson, because he had Dr. Biko was very, very much, because Jackson's work has got lots of quotations and that type of thing. It's, for someone new to Black history, it's an easier work to digest. Whereas with Chancellor Williams, there's hardly any footnotes. I mean, Chancellor Williams's work is exceptionally well researched, but you would have to know a lot to know that it was well researched.
Mm-hmm.
If you're reading it straight, you're wondering, where did he get that from? How can he prove that? Where's his evidence for that? Whereas with Jackson, the evidence is all laid out. So Femi was the one that got me into Jackson. And as I read Jackson's work, I read it several times. I realized, yeah, this is the best book. It has everything in it. The origin of the human race is in there. Ancient Ethiopia, the Ethiopia that existed before Kemet, that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
The rise and fall of Kemet is in there. Carthage is in there. Ghana, Mali, Songhai, that's in there. Kanem Bornu, that's in there. The Swahili city-states. All of this stuff is in there. Very, very comprehensive book. And so that book laid out the template for what I was going to do.
Okay, fantastic. You're listening to the Browder File. My special guest today is the brilliant Robin Walker. We're discussing his life, the influences on his life, and we're going to do a dive into his book, his masterpiece, When We Ruled. I'm not sure that I need to do a break at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to keep it moving and continue our discussion. I want to also share a quote in your book from Van Sertima. And before I do that, let me back up. I had the pleasure of meeting, of knowing, and of calling my friend, some of these scholars. My first trip to Africa was with Dr. Ben in 1980. I met John Henry Clark here in DC after a lecture the month after I came back from traveling to Africa with Dr. Ben. And when I heard Clark speak, Clark is a poet, but he also writes in such a poetic way. And I realized once I cultivated a relationship with Dr. Clark, that it was John Jackson who influenced the writing of Dr. Clark. And one of my proudest moments, brother, was in the fall of 1989 when I did an event called the Elder Symposium. And I brought together John Henry Clark, John Jackson, and Dr. Ben. It was the first time the three of them had been together in over 20 years. Dr. Jackson taught Dr. Clark and Dr. Jackson taught Dr. Ben. So to have these three brothers together, man, was the highlight of my life. I could have died that evening at the end of that program and gone to heaven and been satisfied. But as I was beginning my career, I so admired the work of Dr. Jackson. And I was blessed to be given his telephone number and called him up. We had a great conversation. And what I realized, we must have been on the phone for a couple of hours. And what I realized is how brilliant this man was, because he was talking about incidences that happened in his life 40, 50 years ago as if they just happened. And at the Elder Symposium, Clark gave him the greatest compliment when Clark said that he's been with Jackson at dozens of lectures, dozens of presentations, and he's never seen him use notes. So I'm sure Jackson had a photographic memory. And in talking to this brilliant man, and this had to have been around maybe 87, around that time, for 87, 88. And I'm just pining on this man, hanging on his every word. And he told me at this time, he was kind of depressed. He was in his 80s at that time, and told me that if he had to do it all over again, he wouldn't. Jackson was very light-skinned, and he said if he had to do it all over again, he would pass for white. And as I got to know him, I understood why he was so despondent, because he realized that his people were not ready for the information that he was prepared to give them. And it just broke his heart. And I urged him that times were different, that things were changing. And I want you to come to Washington and see what's happening in Washington. So I was so pleased when I was able to get here and combine him with John Henry Clark and Dr. Ben. But another dear soul that touched my heart deeply was Ivan Van Sertima. I had the pleasure of traveling to Mexico with Van Sertima on a couple of occasions. And you referenced something that is quintessential Ivan. You have a quote from him where he says, whether something happened 10 minutes ago or 10,000 years ago, if you remember it, it occupies the same space in consciousness. Now, if that's not a mind-blowing, a mind-freeing.
It's a heavy concept, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, man. It is. And that's what endeared me to him and the other scholars that you referenced. That's what also endears me to you, because what you do is you make history alive. And for people who have, as Dr. Clark often said, been written out of the respectable commentary of human history, we've got to find a way to make history alive, to make it live in the DNA of the people who are reading your works, such that the ancestors speak through them, right? And they move them to remember their stories and keep them going. So I want to pivot and invite you to talk about your work, When We Ruled. And I don't want to put any restraints on you. I want you to talk about some of the most important chapters in that book and why they are important for your readers to internalize in their consciousness.
Okay, certainly. When We Ruled, let me talk through what I consider to be the most outstanding parts of the book. Chapter 1 is what I call Survey of the Monuments. Now, why am I giving you a survey of monuments? You see, most people don't have an idea that Africa has a built-up history. I mean, physical infrastructure in building up buildings and monuments and temples and mosques and churches and this type of thing. Most people don't associate that with Africa. And the only parts of Africa that they are willing to contemplate, okay, there's some monuments there, is Kemet. And so the idea then that there's over 230 pyramids in Sudan, we need to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that the Great Mosque of Timbuktu is still standing, the Great Mosque of Djenné is still standing, the University Mosque of Sankore is still standing, we need to give that some shine. The fact that the palaces of Hausaland are still intact and they're still used by the kings in Hausaland. Hausaland is northern Nigeria. That needs to be said. So chapter 1 of the book is giving people an architectural appreciation of African history and heritage. And for most readers, it blows their minds. What do you mean architectural appreciation? There's nothing there to architecturally appreciate. So I will show people if the building's intact, the building being intact. If the building's in ruins, I'm still going to give you a powerful image. Then you've got things like the underground churches in Lalibela. You know that there's a city in Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
There's 11 churches carved underground. People need to see that. So that's a very prominent chapter in the book. And a second chapter that I'm really proud of, there's a chapter where I give an overview of African history from a female perspective, where we're talking about the role of African women in the origin and evolution of African history. Some of the monuments they had built, such as Pharaoh Hatshepsut, her monument carved out of the side of a mountain. Bakwa Turunku, who built the palace in the Hausa city of Zaria, which is still being used to this day. So these are the kind of things that people need to know. These are the things that I want people to take away. And then the rest of the book is a survey of African history, north, south, east, west, central, taking the story through the slave trade and Black resistance to the slave trade, the Maroon societies, the Maroon communities, and bringing the story up to the 20th century.
Fantastic. Look, in talking about the people who influenced you in writing When We Rule, I neglected to reference one person who is near and dear to both of us, and that is Runoko Rashidi. Runoko wrote the introduction to When We Ruled. Why did you ask Runoko to write that introduction?
It wasn't me that asked Runoko, it was William Paul Coates. But I was delighted when I found out that Rashidi said, yep, he'll write it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did each other a favor. So I wrote the foreword to one of his books. He did a book on Black people in Europe. Finch wrote the introduction and I wrote the foreword.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm absolutely delighted that Rashidi, who at the time was the biggest name in Black history at the time, because everybody else had passed or whatever.
Yeah.
And him agreeing to do it, I'm chuffed. There's the word chuffed. Do you use the word chuffed in America?
I ain't never heard that word in my life, my brother. I ain't never heard that word.
What's the word? I was
You were sized. You were thrilled beyond measure.
right. Let's say that. Let's say
Okay.
that.
Okay. Yeah, and again, Renoko falls under the same title as we do, as some of our favorite scholars. Renoko was self-taught. Renoko was latched on to Ivan Van Sertima. Van Sertima gave him the opportunity to write in the Journal of African Civilizations, and he took off and is one of our brightest stars. So I'm so pleased that you and Renoko had a chance to connect and to do some work together. And again, I'm saddened by his sudden passing in Egypt because he and I were talking about doing more work together. And it really reinforces how important it is to value time because we never know how much time we have here on this planet. As stated at the top of the show, we just lost Neely Fuller Jr. And we never know how long we're going to be here. So it's critically important for us, particularly for us as African men, to work together in partnership, to demonstrate to ourselves that we can work together and we're not in competition, to demonstrate to those who are watching us that we can work together and model for our young people what African manhood looks like. So at this point in my life, I want to spend, the rest of my life doing that and building with brothers primarily. I believe in working with everybody, but I really want to build with brothers. And, I've developed a wonderful relationship with our mutual friend, Paul Coates. He's like a big brother to me. And as someone who was an only child, I really understand how important it is to have a brother who has your back. So I trust this is going to be the beginning of a flowering relationship, Robin. I'm going to put that out here. I dig what you're doing. I want to bring you to DC. I want to showcase you to everybody who loves my work and are unfamiliar with you. They need to know your work, man. So continue talking about your work, your masterpiece, When We Rule.
All right. So the original title of the book was going to be When We Were Kings. And my publisher suggested, no. You've got to make this gender neutral. So if you take When We Were Kings and make it gender neutral, that's where we got the title When We Ruled from. My publisher was a black man in London called Patrick Vernon. And he had a lot of business vision. And his vision was, can we make this book technically a really good, expensive looking book? So the whole book was color photographs. The whole book, we spent a lot of money on really getting a good design, a hardback cover. The version that exists in America is the American version. Which
That's
is
cool. That's cool. I'm fine with it.
And the result was we put together a very visual product because, I said the whole thing before, trying to bring African history alive and showing that African history isn't just Kemet. So photographs of the Great Zimbabwe, we have that in there. Photographs of the Great Mosque of Kilwa in Tanzania, we have that in there. The underground churches of Lalibela, we've got that in there. The obelisks of Aksum, we've got that in there. The palaces, all these sorts of images that you don't usually see in an Afrocentric history book. Then you've got the fine art of Yoruba, the fine art of Benin, making sure that people get to see this stuff because we believed that getting people to see this is game changing.
Sure, absolutely. There's a saying here in the States, I believe this saying is associated with the state of Missouri. It's on the license plates. Missouri is a show me state. And there's a saying here, seeing is believing, right? If you can't see it, it's not real. We also have a saying here in the United States, that if you want to keep a secret from Black folk, put it in a book, because we've been socialized not to read. And so it was a masterful business move to take this book, which clocks in at 708 pages, weighs about 3 or 4 pounds. It was an important move to add photographs in this book so that you engage the reader on multiple levels simultaneously, right brain and left brain learning. So, it was a great move. And obviously, you're a good listener, you're a good learner, and the reader, benefit from your listening and following the advice of people who have your best interests at heart. So we've got about 9 more minutes left in this portion of the show. So continue and tell us more about When We Rule, some more highlights about When We Rule.
The next thing was to put together a very, very comprehensive proof dealing with who the ancient Egyptians were. Now, I'm certainly not the first person to have gone there. Other scholars have already done it. Professor Sheikh Anta Diop, Professor Youssef Ben Yochanan, yourself. A whole heap of people have gone there before me. But what I wanted to do was put all the hard evidence in one place and put all the counter evidence in one place and smack down all the counter arguments so that we can kill this discussion. Do you see? So, and in doing so, the value of the book, the value of what I'm bringing to the table is enhanced because a lot of stupid arguments that Eurocentric or Arabocentric scholars used to use are silly. They're now, silly. And we're able now to have all the good material in one place.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very important thing.
Well, I commend you for doing that and doing such a masterful job in settling this argument. But as we know, there's something about the mindset of fools that is difficult to penetrate because this argument, this debate continues to this very day. And one of the primary reasons why there's a segment of the population, some scholars, some politicians, some capitalists, the reason why they want to perpetuate this myth of ancient Egypt or Kemet being a non-African nation is because of tourism.
Yeah, of course.
They think people would not come to visit Egypt today if they knew that all of these great things were created by African people. So they have to lie in order to continue this money grab, but we have to continue to present the truth and free those minds that are willing to listen. So I thank you for that, and continue, brother. Continue.
Oh, let me say something else that's closely related. What my co-writer for the book When We Ruled is a gentleman called Fari Supia. And what happened was Shomaka Keita. You know Shomaka Keita?
I don't believe I do. Name's not
Shomaka Keita, physical anthropologist at Howard University.
Oh, yes. Howard, yes. I met the brother on a couple of occasions. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he visited Oxford University, and I can't remember who contacted him first, but we got to meet him at Oxford, and we spent 9 hours chopping it up with Shomaka Keita. Yeah. That was a very powerful thing as well.
He's a deep brother.
Yeah. And his research has silenced everybody. You know that we can now estimate how much sub-Saharan African ancestry existed in the Amarna era mummies. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Shomaka Keita and his team estimate that Pharaoh Tutankhamen is 93.7% sub-Saharan African. Yeah.
So he's a brother, without a doubt. He's a brother, which would mean that his father and his mother were also African. And anyone who was familiar with his grandparents we know that they were African, and you have his grandmother on the cover of When We Ruled. And this is one of my favorite images of Queen T. This particular image reminds me so much of Dr. Wellesley because she's got the big fro and she's got the stern, don't mess with me look on her face.
Yeah.
I've grown to appreciate Queen T and her husband Amenhotep III. Man, they were the most magnificent power couple in ancient time that the world knows little or nothing about, and they have the largest statue in the Cairo Museum.
Yeah,
the entire museum was built around this statue that's got to be at least 2 or 2.5 stories high. It's an incredible piece of art and architecture. So we got about 3 more minutes in this segment. So and what I want to do, if your time permits, we have this thing on the Browder File show where if I have a guest and it's just going so good, we do a special segment called the Overflow, where we go into a 5th quarter. So I would like to invite you to the Overflow. We have a limited time space here on the station, and we go off at 5:55. But if you would hold on, I'd like to continue our discussion and unpack more about When We Rule. But go ahead and kind of wrap it up and tell us your vision for your work and what you plan to do within the next decade or so.
Well, let me introduce your listeners to, there's an online course that I'm part of. We're called the Black Secret Education Project. And the idea was to take the content of When We Ruled and turn it into online classes. So if people check out www.theblacksecret.co.uk, we have a subscription course where we're teaching people a very, very detailed Black history course. And it's based on the When We Ruled thing.
Okay, but do me a favor and repeat the website again a little bit slower so people can jot it down.
Okay, so we're called The Black Secret. So people Google The Black Secret, you'll find us. Okay. But the full name is www.theblacksecret.co.uk.
.co?
.uk.
.co. Now that's new to me. So I wanted to. I heard that before, but I wasn't sure what I was hearing. .co, DOTCO, or what is that?
Right. Dot.
CO.
You know that in America is .com, right?
Yes.
Yeah. In England it's .co.uk.
Okay. .co.uk.
That's right.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So
we have an online subscription course where the classes were filmed in a London classroom. And it's me teaching and someone filming me and then having my presentation available. And people can teach themselves ancient, medieval, and modern Black history, taking the story from human origins all the way up to African-American civil rights struggle. In fact, you're a jazz man. When they bombed when the KKK bombed the church
in Birmingham and killed the 4 girls. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You know that Coltrane wrote a piece called Alabama.
Yep.
We managed to sneak that into the class. So
there you go.
So yeah. So we've got that type of content available online. So check us out.
All right. Well, look, man, sit tight. We're going to wind down this segment. And I also want our listeners to know that we have made arrangements to secure the talents of Robin Walker so that he will be our docent for our tour to London and Paris in July of this year. We're going to the greatest crime scenes in the world, the British Museum and the Louvre. And Brother Robin has agreed to walk us through the Egyptian collection so that we can see those artifacts that were stolen and have him interpret the meaning of all of these structures. So if you want more information about our next study tour, you can go to the IKG website, download the brochure, and join us, meet Robin in person. And we'll be talking more about this in the coming weeks. So Robin, thank you so much for joining us today on the Browder File. We will have you back. I'm looking for souls such as yours that connect with me, connect with our audience, and we want to have you back on the regular so you can teach us our history, and so that we can also build Pan-African bridges, across the Atlantic Ocean and connect African people who've been separated by these damn Brits, man. I get on Paul about you damn Brits, man. But that's grist for another meal. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And with every single episode of the Browder File, we talk about the importance of knowing yourself. We talk about the importance of loving yourself because it's accentuating and elevating the love within you that matters. And so we close every show with my favorite artist, with my favorite group, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Maurice White, talking about love, loving yourself. So my man, take us out with Maurice White, and I will see you all next week. Tune in to Bobby Rocks this Friday for some good information. And we'll have some good stuff for you next week when we have the pledge drive for WPFW. Tony Browder, thank you so much for joining us. And my guest today, Robin Walker. And continue on with this discussion. This is Tony Browder, and this is the Browder File. We are in the Overflow Room. The conversation was so good that we're extending ourselves beyond the 4 quarters allowed. We're going into the 5th quarter. That's right. I never was good at math, but I know a good thing when I hear it. We're in the 5th quarter, and we're going to invite my dear friend, my brother, Robin Walker, to continue sharing with us some of the highlights of his classic, When We Rule. So Robin, welcome to the Overflow Room, and tell us more about your masterpiece, When We Rule.
Okay, let me introduce some key facts, if you like. Things that everybody should know about Black history, but that information has been kept from them. There was a civilization in Nigeria called the Empire of Benin. And what happened was Britain conquered Benin and made it part of Nigeria. But then they did a survey in the early 1900s of the walling and reported that there's a lot of walling. They did another survey in the 60s and they concluded that there's between 5,000 and 8,000 miles worth of walling. And the result is...
Okay, let me stop you for a second now. I'm having difficulty understanding that word, walling. You mean walls, brick walls, mason structures, Masonic structures, walling.
That's right.
Got it. Okay. That's a term we don't use here. So every once in a while, you guys throw me a curve and I have to ask for clarification. So thank you for that.
And between 5,000 and 8,000 miles worth of walls meant that it ended up in the Guinness Book of World Records, the largest construction work carried out in the pre-mechanical era. Subsequent research showed that it wasn't 5,000 to 8,000 miles worth of walls. It was 10,000 miles worth of walling.
How does that compare to the Great Wall of China?
It's longer.
It's longer, okay.
And at the time that Benin existed and the Great Wall of China existed, at the time, Benin was 4 times the length of the Great Wall of China.
Yeah? Incredible.
Right now, you'll notice that no one talks about this, even though it's in the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, that needs a discussion. People need to know that. Did we know? Then you have the recent discoveries coming out of the Malian city of Timbuktu. According to National Geographic, they estimate that there are 700,000 manuscripts that have survived. Chancellor Williams had the idea that all the manuscripts had been destroyed in 1591. Jackson says they were all destroyed in 1594. They were both wrong. The manuscripts, 700,000 of them have survived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And those 700...
I'm glad you make that point. And what is sorrowful is that one of the sorriest personalities who has been packaged and is now passed off as the greatest Black historian. I'm talking about Henry Skip the Truth Gates. You know, he
Yeah.
claims to have discovered these lost manuscripts
Mhm.
and is again manipulating the history. But it's so important that you acknowledge great scholars who did the research but made errors. But it's also equally important that we acknowledge not so great scholars who are also erasing African history.
But here's the thing. When Professor Gates did his TV series, in Britain it was called Into Africa with Henry Louis Gates. I know the American one was called Wonders of the African World. It's the same documentary series.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Just
Um,
rebranded. Mm-hmm.
so even though I'm agreeing with you, Professor Gates did a lot of what the Nation of Islam would call half-stepping.
Mm.
When it came to Timbuktu, he stepped hard, trust me. He
Okay.
stepped hard. And he interviewed in the Timbuktu one a gentleman called Ali Ul Sidi, who was at one time the mayor of Timbuktu. Now, staying with me, there's a point to this.
Okay.
I was invited to Mali and I met this same Ali Ul Sidi. He was my driver. I know
Lord.
things happen. Yeah, he was my
Former
driver.
mayor, the former mayor
Yeah.
of Timbuktu was your driver. Okay.
Yeah. One of the government people arranged for him to be the person ferrying me around. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he was surprised that I knew who he was. And no, sir, we watched that documentary. So Henry Louis Gates, even though he didn't step correctly in a lot of our history, he stepped correctly there.
Okay. Well, you know, we have a saying here in the States, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Right, right. Yeah.
So let
But
me ask you a question. Since you've been to Mali, Mali is one country in Africa that I have yet to visit, but I have a friend, a very close friend, who I'm sure knows Makeda because she's close to Sister Janua. She's a designer, dress designer, clothing designer, and she
Mhm.
travels to Mali every year to oversee
Mhm.
the production of cloth, particularly indigo.
Mhm.
And when she went, I think last year, she took some photographs of a number of tekenu or obelisks that
Mhm.
are in a number of different cities throughout Mali. Have you seen any of these objects? I'm
Yes, I
interested.
have. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so look, I'm on the
But they're
same.
not ancient. They're not ancient.
Yeah, I know they were modern, and I asked her if she could give me or tell me, find out from anyone
I've,
who.
I've got photographs. So if you want, send me your email,
Okay,
send me a what's it, and I can reply and attach.
okay. All right, so this is what I'm primarily interested in. Who is responsible for overseeing the design and construction of those Tekenu?
It
And
was.
what was his
It's a modern thing.
motivation?
It's a
Pardon me?
modern thing. This is what
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is. It's a
No,
modern
no,
thing.
I know it's modern, but the reason why I ask you this is that I've been to Guyana several times,
Yeah.
and I was visiting a small town, small village in Guyana, and I saw a Tekken. Now, granted, it was a small Tekken, and I started inquiring about that, and I was told that the first Black president of Guyana had
Mhm.
commissioned a number of them throughout the country. I
Yeah.
have not been able to find anyone to this date who can tell me why he commissioned them, how many there are, and where they're located. I am certain that they are there for a specific purpose. And I think the same lesson applies to Mali. Whoever was responsible for recreating the symbol that represents the resurrection of a Asar, put them in specific locations for specific reasons. And I'd like to know what those reasons are. So I'll reach out to you to get whatever information you can provide to me about that.
Certainly. And you'll be interested to know that the obelisk, the one I saw, has got four sides,
Mm-hmm.
and each side has got a different African writing system.
Mm.
So they've got Dogon symbols on one side, Bambara symbols on the other side. a script called Nko on a third side, and there's a fourth set of inscriptions as well. Yeah,
Okay, so all of these scripts are scripts that are indigenous to Mali, to West Africa.
that's right,
Okay,
that's
so
right.
there's no Medu Neter or anything like that on any
No,
of
but some of the symbols for you as a Medu Neter person, some of the symbols I suspect you're going to recognize and think, wait a minute, that is a bit like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, as a matter of fact, speaking of symbols, I went to Ethiopia in what 2011, I think, and went to Aksum
Yeah.
and saw the Tekenu field, the field of Tekenu, and the broken one that you have a photograph of in your book. And our guy, young brother, very, very, very sharp and enthusiastic brother, our guy was talking about the symbols on the Tekken have not been identified. There's still a mystery. And I said, well, wait a minute, I know what that symbol is. And I started breaking the symbol down, and his mind was blown. And I said, well, I can trace those symbols back to Kemet. Those same symbols exist in Kemet. And he knew nothing about Kemetic history and culture. So we hit it off. We started talking apart from the group. And the very next day when I saw the brother, when he came to collect the group, he was wearing an ankh. And he's not been the same since. So our knowledge, our history, our secrets are literally hidden in plain sight. And it's our job, it's our responsibility to bring those messages forward. So
Yes, sir.
yeah, so continue, man. Sorry for cutting you off, but I get excited when you talk about certain things, and I just need to chime in while I still remember what you said.
Okay, this is what I was told about the obelisk. This is what I was told.
Okay.
I was invited to Mali by a former government minister, Professor Adama Samaseku. So he was still at the time he was an advisor to the president. So that's the status that he held. And he said that the reason the obelisk was built was influenced by the Aksum obelisk.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Except what they wanted to do was to put Malian cultural symbols on it. So you've got Bambara, Dogon,
Mm-hmm.
Nkok, and another group called Bozo.
Bozo, yes. Mm-hmm.
So those are the kinds of symbols. And I said some of them do look slightly hieroglyphic-ish, so you might spot something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I made a point of photographing them very, very exactly, so you will be able to see.
Excellent. Thank you. And so I will reach out to you to request a copy of the photographs. You also mentioned in When We Ruled, the caption for the photograph of the broken Tekken. I prefer using the Kemetic word Tekken instead of obelisk, so please bear with me. The broken Tekken at Aksum, you stated that it was the tallest Tekken in the world. So it was taller than any of the Tekkenu that are still standing in Kemet?
With the exception of the one that was in Aswan and didn't get moved.
Right.
Yes, definitely.
The unfinished.
The broken one in Aksum has got the details of a 13-story building carved into it.
13-story building, 130 feet then. Okay, that's incredible. That is incredible. Okay.
520 tons, which is about the same weight as 650 cars or automobiles. That's the kind of weight we're talking about.
Yeah. And so they had to carve the stone out of the earth, erect it, and then carve the imagery, the symbols on the stone. That's incredible craftsmanship, man. I love what our people have done. And I love scholars who bring this forgotten information, this lost information, this stolen information, this hidden information to light. So continue with When We Ruled highlights.
Another highlight. In Tanzania, there was a city called Kilwa. And Kilwa is described as one of the most beautiful and well-constructed cities on earth, all elegantly built, says Ibn Battuta, who visited it in 1331. So what's in Kilwa? I've got photographs of the Great Mosque of Kilwa, and there's also a palace in Kilwa, the ruins of which you can still see, wait for it, the indoor swimming pool.
How old is this structure?
See it, huh?
How old is this structure?
1300.
1300. Okay. Mm-hmm.
An African palace with an indoor swimming pool.
So let me ask you. Let me ask you a technical question, because I do like to get into the weeds sometime. Technical / engineering question. How was water fed into that pool? Did they have channels that allowed water to continuously flow in? Do you know anything about that?
That I don't know, but this is what I do know, which does answer your question.
Okay.
The Swahili cities, this is a Swahili civilization, yeah? Definitely had bathrooms, definitely had toilets, definitely had running water, and definitely had wastewater drains.
Okay.
And why I can say this with definite is I visited the East African coast, and I've seen these things for myself. So if you need a source for who said, I said.
All right. Well, that's good enough for me then, brother. So
and I've also got photographs as well.
Okay, so they had hydraulic engineers who oversaw the design and construction of all of these buildings. Well, look, man.
And so much so, if I may jump in,
sure,
it's fair to say that the Swahili culture, in terms of its domestic houses and buildings, they're so good that they would stand comparison with the finest palaces built anywhere on the planet, the grandest houses built anywhere. For you, as a modern African American, you'd be proud to own one of those buildings.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
In other words, it really does hold up. The quality of the brickwork, the quality of, the quality of the stonework, the quality of the floral designs on the walls, absolutely exquisite.
Okay. So, I mean, you're really speaking my language, because I had aspirations as a high school student. I had aspirations of being an architect. I lived in Chicago, which is the first skyscraper was built in Chicago. Chicago has some phenomenal architecture, and so I was enamored with it, and took 2 years of architecture courses. My last 2 years of high school, I did 1 year of architecture at the University of Illinois, and then got frustrated with a whole host of things that were happening in Chicago in the late 60s and early 70s, and decided to change my major. I moved to DC and attended Howard University, where I changed my major to graphic design and advertising, and I minored in music for a short period of time. So architecture is in my blood. But I have a question. I have another question for you along this line. And I put it to our mutual friend, Paul Coates, last weekend, as a matter of fact, and he wasn't able to answer it. There's been, as you well know, a great deal of interest in the Moors and the presence of the Moors in Spain. And you cover that history quite extensively in your book. But I have a question. The Moors created some phenomenal architecture in Spain and in Portugal. But if they traveled to Spain and Portugal, if they traveled to Europe from Northern Africa, from Morocco, then why don't we find similar structures in Northern Africa?
There are.
There are. Okay. Tell me where, please.
Yeah. The city of Marrakesh is a Moorish city. And there's a monument in Marrakesh. I've got a photograph of it, and I think you've even got it in the American version. There's a a monument called the Kutubia Mosque of Marrakesh.
Okay.
And if you look at the Kutubia Mosque of Marrakesh and compare it to the one that the Moors built in Seville, the great mosque of Seville, its tower is still standing, and you can see that the Kutubia tower and the Seville tower, you can tell that they were built by the same team of architects.
And phenomenal. Good, good, good. Thank you for that. I'm gonna investigate that. But you just said something to pique my curiosity. You said in describing that building, the photograph is probably in the American edition of your book. So that suggests that there's some content that's in the British edition that didn't make its way into the American edition. Is
In
that
some
true?
cases, yes. In some cases.
So what's missing? What are we missing?
Here's the thing. The very first edition of When We Ruled was a very expensive project.
Sure.
So we spent a lot of money buying photographs and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the photographs we could use again for the American edition.
Mm-hmm.
Others we simply couldn't afford.
Okay.
So the very first hardback edition, I think there are still bookshops in America selling the first hardback edition, but obviously they're selling it with some zeros added to the price.
Absolutely.
That has got some photographs that aren't in the American edition.
Okay.
And it was quite simply that we couldn't afford it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you have any hardback editions, hardback copies of the first edition in a garage somewhere? And I would like to purchase one when I see you in July.
I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Well, I'll take that as a yes. Thank you. Thank you in advance.
I'll put that as I'll see what I can do.
Okay, got it. I hear you, brother.
I don't want a floodgate of people because those are my copies.
No. Look,
we can sort something out.
Well, look, I appreciate that. I respect you for that. And this will be a secret just between the two of us. And you know what's interesting? What this reminds me of is when Volney wrote. Say the name again. I'm having a brain freeze.
Yeah, the Ruins
of Empire. Ruins of Empire. Yes. And I remember Doc Ben talking about Ruins of Empire in his lecture. And what I didn't find out until much later, Doc never mentioned this in his lectures, and it may have been when Paul Coates republished Ruins of Empire, because I did the cover design for that. It stated that when Volney came to America to do a book tour, and he discovered that there were certain passages that were eliminated from the American edition, especially that quote that Doc Ben talked about. There are people now forgotten who discovered while others were yet barbarians, the elements of the arts and sciences. So, you know, it's so important to understand how great books with profound information have been used as tools to keep us in the dark, keep us ignorant. So, you know, I'm so appreciative of people such as yourself, Robin, who read these books, who find these nuggets of information. You buy a book and there just may be one sentence in that book that makes it valuable, and then you spread the word, you share that information, man. So I so admire, you know, people who have the time and the energy to do that work. So yeah, we'll continue, and you know, I'm going to keep you. I want to be respectful of your time. It's 19 minutes after, so if you don't mind, can we do another 14 minutes, and I'll let you go at the bottom of the hour.
Okay, certainly.
Okay, all right. So share with me and those who will see this broadcast, because on our YouTube channel, I post a video so folks can see this. Tell us what you want us to know about this book, what we need to know about this book, and how we can use this information to make our lives better.
The main thing is, when it comes to who we are as African people, especially those of us descended from slaves, yeah, our ancestors from the parts of Africa that we were captured from, they were not backward, they were not primitive. And the new research, there's an African-American scholar who needs to be bigged up, and you might want to get him onto your show at some point.
Okay.
Vincent Taraku Farrar has written a book called Pre-Colonial African Material Culture. And what Vincent is showing is that those of us that were captured in this part of Africa or that part of Africa were captured to bring certain technologies to the Americas. You mentioned, for example, indigo in Mali. You know that there's a very famous image of enslaved Africans in America, and there's Native Americans on the same plantation working indigo.
Okay.
And that very famous image shows the transfer of technology from the West African desert belts, people being snatched from there to bring that technology to the Americas. And so when it comes to our history, okay, let me give you a for real example. In When We Ruled, I point out that the Emperor of Ghana in the 7th century, the same time as the Islamic prophet, his name was Emperor Kanisai, had 1,000 horses and 3,000 attendants looking after those 1,000 horses. Okay, you know that during the slave trade, people were captured in Senegal and Gambia precisely because of their horsemanship skills. And those people went on to become the cowboys in America and cowboy culture in Haiti and so on and so forth. And I think in Haiti, all the cowboys were black. And in America, 1/3 of all the cowboys were black. So you can see a direct transfer of African technology. Same thing. Did you know that there's, again, this is Vincent Taraku Farrar. Did you know that there's an 18th century source, the British Government Select Committee, which says that the cotton that has been carried from Senegambia has repeatedly proven to be the finest in the world. Do you know that there's a source that says that?
Okay. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Pardon?
So what do you think slave traders are going to do with that information?
They're going to bring the Africans who developed that cotton across the ocean and help make the United States the wealthiest nation in human history.
Right. And then African Americans are then going to have this reputation as cotton pickers, not realizing that, no, that's connecting you to African technology that your ancestors brought from Senegambia. Do you see?
Exactly. You know, and the same thing applies to the Africans in South Carolina along the Gullah Geechee coast who were the rice farmers. They did the same thing on the west coast of Africa. I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier with regards to the cowboys. I learned reading a book on Black cowboys by a writer by the name of Katz, I believe, that cowboys is a pejorative term. The Black people were called cowboys. The white men were called cattlemen, cattle ranchers, right? You get that? So, and the other thing, I've got a cousin in Florida who raises horses, and the horses that he raises and breeds are called Morgan. And the Morgans are some of the finest workhorses, and I would not be surprised if they were brought to the States from Africa. I'm going to need to talk to him about that. So yeah, now here's another jewel I want to drop on you because I think you can appreciate it. There was a brother I met in Washington, a brother by the name of Harry Jones, and he was the foremost scholar on African Americans who fought in the Civil War. I came to hear him lecture at the Thurgood Marshall Center back in 2006, and he literally blew my mind when he talked about the fact that there were Africans in West Africa who were part of a secret society, and that some of their members had been stolen during enslavement, and these men allowed themselves to be captured so that they could come to the United States and look for some of their stolen comrades, and that they found each other and they reconnected and continued their work within these secret societies. And I hate using that word. I prefer, societies with secrets. But here's something that really piqued my interest when he said that these men were known as the Loyal League, and that they were instrumental in developing the spy network that allowed the Union Army defeat the Southerners who rebelled, and that their role in the Civil War was so important that Lincoln invited a group of them to the White House to acknowledge their work. So there's so much history, man, that is, a Black secret, as you said, and that needs to be brought into the light so that those who are ready to receive it can free their minds, change their behavior, and ultimately change the world. So this is sacred work. Dr. Clark said that the people who do this work are engaged in a priesthood, and it is sacred work that I feel very strongly. It is work that is being continued in our lifetime because of the spirits that move through us from previous lifetimes have to ensure that the light of Africa is never extinguished. So we are vessels, man, and this is special work that only special people can do and do well. And I recognize you, brother. There's a term used in Indian culture, namaste. The God in me, the ancestor in me acknowledges the ancestor in you. And I know that we are one. I know that we are one. And, we're going to build together. So I'm not going to keep you long, man. So yeah, if you want to wrap up and give us any concluding remarks, please do so.
Yeah, let me do that. Yeah, I mean, and your influence can't go unacknowledged. Your influence in among Black people in Britain has been big. Yeah, we still loving your book, Nile Valley Contributions. We still, checking out your thing, Egypt on the Potomac. Yeah. All right. Now, here's the thing. There's something that you've said. I think you said it in lectures, but I don't know if you put pen to paper. The 7 laws of Tehuti.
That's Wayne Chandler, who talks about the 7 laws of Tehuti. Yeah. And I may have referenced him in a lecture, but that's Wayne's thing.
The reason why I'm bringing it up is my research says that those 7 laws are the same 7 laws that underpin success philosophies such as Think and Grow Rich.
I can believe that. Absolutely.
And this is a whole area where the African-centered thing could be used, because I believe that a lot of the people talking about success and wealth and opulence, all that kind of stuff, are running with the 7 laws of Tehuti. And for you and for other people that study Kemet, you'll be able to spot these things instantly. Sure. And it's a whole area that could be used to popularize African culture today, because it shows its direct relevance that while we are being told your ancestors were practicing witchcraft, people are running with our same stuff, repackaged And Napoleon Hill repackaged it one way, Dale Carnegie repackaged it another way. And those are the two most influential books of the
Absolutely.
20th century.
Absolutely. And listen, another book that has the same philosophy is As a Man Thinketh by Allen. And what I realized in doing a little research on that book and that era, that book came out shortly after the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. And it represents a reintroduction of Kemetic thought into the European world. So Europeans were studying Kemet and they were mining some of these ancient ideas and refining them and using them to empower themselves while not acknowledging the source. So I see the flow of this information moving in cycles, Robin. And I also see and I feel to the depths of my soul that we are entering another phase now. And so it's so critically important that we make sure that this work gets out, that we use all the means available to us, all the technology. That's why I love what you're doing, and that we correct the errors. But the other reality is that I'm always conscious of, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So there's pushback, and we're now experiencing with the rise of the American Hitler, an effort to squash all of this. So things are going to come to a head. And I don't know what the outcome will be, but I feel that there's some impending disaster that will eliminate much of the competition, much of the opposition, and create a window of opportunity for those who know who they are to begin to build from the ashes and create something new again. I think that's where all of this is going. And there's a hidden hand that is moving through souls like yours, through souls like mine and Finch and others, to make sure that this information is accessible to as many people as possible so that we will be the ones who will jumpstart civilization and save humanity. And it speaks to the sacredness of this work. So, man, we've got, it was a pleasure talking to you. And listen, we have this program that we've been doing since what, 1987. It's been rebranded as our Wisdom Wednesday series. And I've passed that off to a sister who coordinates all of the speakers for the program, but it's the third Wednesday of every month. And I think she still has some gaps in the schedule for 2025. So if you don't mind, I'm going to connect you with Sister Adjua. And if you're available to do one of our Wisdom Wednesdays, I would love to have you. I would be honored to have you, grace our presence with your knowledge. I think we've got Wayne Chandler coming back on soon, and he'll be talking about the 7 laws of Jehudi and even more information. We did a program with Wayne. Paul and I did a program with Wayne in December. That was so mind blowing that people demanded that we bring him back. So we're going to do that with him. And I love to have you on as a Wisdom Wednesday guest, as a prelude to bringing you to the States and building up an audience so that we can take you to, a couple of different locations and have you speak, have you sell your books and make some money, my brother. We have to finance our work. It's something that we love to do, but I also respect the fact that this is work and we need to be properly compensated for our work. So I count on us building a meaningful and lasting relationship, man. And this will be the first of many conversations moving forward. And two, one last thing I want to say before I let you close out. Nile Valley Contributions is the book that I'm probably most well known for. And when I published that book in '92, I was a bit overly ambitious. And I said that there were going to be 2 other volumes, right? But life got in the way, as you understand. Life got in the way. Now I'm grateful that life did get in the way, because the book that I'm going to write next, the second volume, is going to be so much better than it would have been had I written it 20 years ago. I have the working title. It's called The Rebirth of Nile Valley Civilization. And I'm going to do a synthesis of all that I've learned about Kemet, about Africa, about the Nile Valley since 1992, and pour my heart and soul into that book. And that will be the book that my grandson will inherit, and it will pay for his tuition through graduate school. So that's my promise to myself, to my grandson, and to the world. So you'll have an opportunity to meet my grandson. He just turned 1 2 weeks ago. He's going to be coming to England and Paris with us. He'll make his first international journey with us. And he's going to take the Browder brand to new heights. You'll also get a chance to meet my daughter, Atlantis. So I'm real excited about meeting you and building some transatlantic bridges between brothers and sisters in America and brothers and sisters in the UK. And it's time for that to happen.
Absolutely, sir.
Yep. Any closing words you want to share?
Only that I hope people enjoyed our conversation. I certainly enjoyed it, and thank you very, very much for inviting me to come on.
All right. You're quite welcome. It's my honor. It's a privilege. And this is the first of many more conversations to come. You have my word on that, my brother. Thank you so much. And look, I will send you a copy of this program, an audio file and a video file, and you're free to use them in any way that you see fit. Okay?
Certainly.
All right. Thank you, my man. Have a good evening.
Listen, have a good one, sir.
All right. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sir.
Good day.